Mother Earth News or something like that.
Yeah.
For people who would have an interest in this field who don't know that they do yet. And I think all of us have an interest in bringing those people in. And so the way I think I'll approach this in terms of an interview is ask a few questions up front about your meeting today. And then those will be primarily for that article we're talking about for the faithful. And then a lot of other questions which may go into either article, but could certainly work toward an article for Mother Earth News or some other thing. And I will submit everything to both of you before we send them anywhere. So everybody's in agreement that's what we want. Okay?
I'm a good editor.
I'm not afraid of an editor.
That's the secret.
My staff edits my memos. All right, shall we take off then?
Yeah.
All right. And I guess I'll throw questions out and invite both of you to answer. If one of you doesn't have a comment, fine. We'll move on to the next one. There will be several thousand people who will be interested in the fact that the two of you have met. Many will be pleased with the news, some will be puzzled, and even a few annoyed. But all will be greatly interested in what you talked about. Please summarize your discussions.
Oh, now that's a simple question.
Half hour to read it.
Well, let me lead out on that. I've been interested for a long time to lay to rest thought or idea that I might be involved in a big controversy or vendetta of any kind that has to do with Tom Brown and myself. There has been contention. There has been things said that were unverifiable in my mind. And as I attended the rest of the rendezvous and some of those things, it just clicked in my mind. It just needs to be put to rest. So I came here for several reasons. First of all, to bury the hatchet, which we did. And secondly, to verify in my own mind who Tom Brown is, who he really is. And the stories that I've heard and even the books he's written are not material to that judgment in my mind. What's material to me is the character of the man that you're looking at. And I feel a good spirit here. And I go by that. It's pretty heavy. It's better to me than evidence of any kind to write about. And so whatever else there may be, or whatever else anyone has said, is now immaterial to me. I see a good man here who's doing good work and a good thing for the community that he works with. And that's what really counts. Another reason I came was to learn a little bit about how Tom does what he does, what it is about the man that keeps people coming back, and the charismatic way that he presents himself, and I've been impressed with that too. So.
That's saying something since I'm sick as a dog today.
Well, you can look through all of that. So, that's why I came.
Tom, you want to make any comments about that?
Yeah, I have to echo the same thing, but to me, I want to take it a step further in that, as you know, I've been seriously concerned with the route the Earth is taking. You know, the things falling apart, frogs disappearing, as we've talked about. And I believe that everybody in the environmental movement, and especially people who are so very close to the Earth, such as Abo people that are interested in Aboriginal skills and going back to the Earth on a one-to-one basis like a child. We've got to set our petty differences and everything aside and look for a greater vision, something where we can all work for instead of working against each other. And a common theme, a common focus, which is, I think, staring us right in the face. The total destruction of our planet, one way or the other. And it has to start with getting rid of all the rumor and innuendo and all the other crap that floats around, and hurts, no matter how much we pretend we're callous to it, and I know Larry's had some of it in his life, that it hurts, and it takes away energy and your focus, and we've got better places to put that energy and focus. I mean, I learned more about Larry today than I just am in awe of his program, and I have been since the first time I heard about it, but now the depths he's taken it to, I see a man that is very, very committed and very spiritual in his beliefs. It's not just a superficial approach to the wilderness. It's a much deeper approach.
Thank you.
What do each of you hope ultimately will be gained from this meeting?
I would hope that the spirit of contention will die, and that people will begin to look at both of the things that we're both doing in the true light that it should be, which is that we are committed to helping people learn. And though there may be different styles of doing it, and maybe different directions that it goes over the years, it's still the same thing. It's a heartfelt interest in people. And as Tom says, the earth itself. I would hope that would disappear, and that even the most angry person, whoever that person may be, will reconsider and at least quit belly aching about it.
Yeah, get on to the battle.
Yeah.
But I think that, you look at the whole movement of people back to the earth, it's so fragmented right now. And hopefully this kind of meeting and union here will pull a lot of people in to one mind and one heart. And one battle.
Yeah, you've got to get that story into your article about two battle lines coming together and then they stop and fight each other.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is really poignant.
That actually is, it's like how the old man put it to me, it's like a mess of people running to battle. And on the way, they're taking swings at each other, and they're kicking each other and throwing each other down, and they're still going to battle, but they ain't never making it there. Mm-hmm. Their energy is so spent pointing fingers and pushing and kicking and fighting. They lose sight of the goal.
Therefore, I think it was a bucket of crabs. One crab is getting close to the top, the rest pulling back down, and it starts all over again.
The two of you made some plans today for the future, for each other, inviting some invitations. Could you talk to us briefly about that? What plans you've laid that involve each other?
Well, I'll tell you what I'd like Tom to do. I would like to extend the invitation to him to come to Anasazi and see what we're doing, and spend some time out on the trail with me at that place, and also to come to a future rabbit sale or winter camp, and encourage some of his people to attend, because I think we do have a lot to offer, and I think that if people can see Tom and get acquainted with him and feel the spirit that I feel, that they'll be ashamed of a lot of stuff that they were making practice. Regardless of what experiences they may have had in the past, that's no longer relevant. Or what they perceived they had, more likely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it just needs to be put to rest. And that's one way we can do that. And I think vice versa, I'd like to be invited to.
Yeah, I'd like Larry to come out and see how we run things. And different than, of course, he's done it in the past, because each person has their own teaching method. And to understand me, my instructor's my teaching methods and the people that come to see me, and realize in the final analysis we're all doing the same thing. Just we go about it a little bit differently. But we want to stay in touch. We want to keep involved with each other. I think that's the bottom line. We want to keep a friendship that should have been going 20 years ago till today, and we've lost 20 years. And I think that we could be good for each other. Yeah, I mean, he's the only person I've been able to talk to about burnout and how to raise your kids the right way, and you know, and don't you feel guilty not practicing your skills, you know, all of that crap. Who else am I going to go to? But it's, I think in a way we can both help each other that way.
Let me branch out into some other areas then. Primitive skills practitioners have sometimes been criticized by environmentalists and those who espouse leave no trace philosophy as despoilers rather than protectors of the earth. Is there any validity to these accusations or concerns? Or are primitive skills practitioners really caretakers of the earth? How do you see
I'll
that?
answer that first. I love this one. There's the old survival, which is I think it's European way of thinking that the land is put here for our abuse and use to do with as we wish. But I believe that a true survivalist is a caretaker of the earth. Things must be harvested. Things must be adjusted and balanced. And a survivalist put into a forest like this that is ailing, overgrown, trees killing each other off and stuff like that could actually be a positive effect, knowing what to take, when to take it. They're not just a caretaker, they're a healer. We're not a mistake from the Creator. We belong here. And if we do this correctly as a survivalist, we're as important as the wolf is to the deer herd or the fox is to the rabbit population. And I know that Larry teaches that same thing. Whenever you gather a plant, whenever you use a material, the earth is put back as we found it, but better. I believe that the people that have this attitude that leave no trace is like passing somebody wounded in the woods, saying well and leaving. I look at the earth as dying, and it needs survivalists as healers. Instead of passing that person by, bandage the wounds, fix what ails them, and then go on.
I think if we lock up the earth in the name of environmentalism, we've taken ourselves away from it. And there's no hope for us. A little story I wanted to illustrate that with. I've often said to people who challenge me on that, say, well, what are you doing to the land out there when you take these groups of people out on the land? And I say, well, the entire group, probably less than one cow does, in the same amount of time. Cattle, although they keep the grass down and keep things cleared out and everything, they can still be very destructive to water holes and that kind of thing, and we don't do that. But the good illustration of that is when I was teaching at BYU, I used to take my classes out to a place called West Mountain. And there was a hillside out there that was just lush with biscuit root and sacral lilies and fritillary bulbs. There were 7 or 8 different bulbs you could dig out there. And I would take classes of 30, 40 people at a time, sometimes 3 or 4 sections of those, and have 100 people out there, all with their digging sticks, digging on that hillside. And I pretty well let them randomly go through, and always with the caution that, always, if you're digging a little patch here, always leave 2 or 3. Don't dig all of them, leave some. And they were pretty respectful for that. Then I began to notice after the 3rd year of doing this, using this same area, every year they come up just a stick or bigger. And by the third year, we began to notice that the bulbs were bigger and better. And after 8 years of working that same ground every spring, we were getting, well, a little thing called the India potato, that usually was about as big around as your little finger, the first joint in your little finger. They were now as big as onion bulbs. I mean, they got like this. And then when an environmentalist group of people contacted me and wanted someone to come over and interview me, and they challenged me on the destruction of wild plants in the environment. That, well, the sago lily is a state flower of Utah. They didn't want us to do any of those. And I just had to say, well, come with me. And I took them out there and showed them what had happened. And I took them over to another place where that hadn't been done and showed them how they were there. And in fact, as stewards of that piece of ground, we had actually improved not only the ground itself by loosening it up, we'd improved the size of the bulbs, we had improved the habitat that was there in many ways. And I really believe that man is the steward of the earth, and that we have that veritable command from the Almighty to take care of it. And to, well, what did he tell Adam and Eve? Till it, make it fruitful, and improve it. And I think that's just what we're doing. I think we overdo that in society.
Tend the garden.
Yeah, tend it. And primitive people generally do that, although we have to admit that sometimes they ran whole herds of buffalo over a cliff just to get enough to eat that day. And there are lots of abuses even back then. But I think the spirit of the whole thing is that things work in their natural process, and man is part of that natural process, and we can take that back.
We're finding now that the Native Americans used to set fires, all through Yosemite, Yosemite, and all the way back out to Yellowstone. So as soon as we got this idea that, okay, we know better what to do, no fires, now it's a big tinder bundle waiting to happen.
And it does.
Yeah, and then we lose everything in a horrible burn. And I believe firmly that survival is a better name for it as a healer or a caretaker, steward.
Each of you has dedicated your whole life to the study and teaching of primitive skills. Why are you so attracted to this field?
For me, it's freedom. When the best time I remember in my life was, I think 19 or 20, and I was my parents had moved north, and I was out in the backyard in a pair of jeans cut-offs, no shoes, no shirt. My mom yelled out the back window because she knew I had my nose on the ground. Be back for dinner by 6. I was, the following June. But I took off. To me, survival is the ultimate freedom. That's something this society can't offer to you. To pull your car off the side of the road and shut that door and say, the hell with you, I'm going back to Mama. And live there. And know you can take care of yourself or your family. But beyond that, you're no longer an alien to your own planet, like the backpack is some kind of a breathing device that you cannot, the backpack's like a ball and chain. You can't go very far, you run out of provisions, you're back to society. And that's breaking that chain. That, not saying that, hey, go out all the time in survival, no, go camping and everything else, but you've got the skill, but you're no longer afraid of Earth Mother, of the wilderness. It's not a wilderness anymore, it's home. That's the lure, the mystery of those skills. Plus, for me, it gets me in contact with something real in my life. Hey, I made this bow and arrow. I made that fire. I didn't go to a store and buy the damn thing. I don't need to. That self-sufficiency is something that's kind of like lost in this country. The mystery, the magic. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just
get
echo that. You just said it. It's the same for me. Other ways of saying that might be that as I grew up, I had this incredible thirst for discovery. And when I found that first arrowhead, you know, I was telling him and his family last night, I never learned to read till I was 12. And I could get through Dick and Jane. You know, I was social promotion all the way up through the 6th grade. Sat on the back row, and Miss Romaine just left me alone. But I found that arrowhead, and I brought it to Dig and Ditch from my uncle, and I just was so fascinated by that. I had it in my pocket, and I'd stick my hand in there, and I'd just do this all day long with it, you know, all weekend. I'd memorized every little facet of it and everything. When I got to school, I got really brave for the first time in my life and took it up and showed it to my teacher. And she just picked it up and handed it back to me, and she said, class, Larry has something he wants to show you. He found an arrowhead. And there I was in front of the class speaking, and I didn't intend that. And I was so angry at her. I mumbled something and went back to my seat. And at 5 o'clock that evening, at 4 o'clock when school got out, she was standing at the door when I came through to get home. She handed me this book. She says, this is about the Indians that made that arrowhead. Hand me that book. Took it home, threw it on the bed, went out and did my chores, came back still angry, and picked it up, and I thought, well, that's not that arrowhead. And I got to the first page, and I struggled through the first sentence, and it grabbed me. By morning, I'd finished the book, and I could read anything from that point on. I went up to the Idaho State University a few months later, and stole a book out of the library because I wasn't old enough to check one out. And the name of it was Basin Plateau Aboriginal Socio-Political Groups by Stewart. Anthropological work on the Paiute Indians. And I absorbed that into my system just immediately, practically memorized it. And so there wasn't anything I couldn't read after that. My teacher finally caught me reading that book inside my other book, Stewart. And she chewed me out, snatched the book up, started to walk up to her desk and started thumbing through it. She got this big surprised look on her face. She turned around and looked at me and walked back and handed me the book. She said, well, you can read this one. So, for me, that act of discovery just hooked me. And I was no longer interested in ball games, cars. I couldn't tell a Ford from a Chevy. I probably still can't. I saw one drive down the road. None of that meant anything to me.
You see, the beauty of that is you integrate that into your teaching. You integrate that same thing, that same discovery.
Yeah.
You develop it in your students and make them thirst for more.
Yeah. I just wanted to spend all my time out in the desert. That's all I lived and breathed for. And I did. Consequently, I didn't graduate from high school until a year late. And by that time, the teachers, my counselor had told me that I should get a good job down at the coal yards and keep it. That was my best hope. That's true. And that made me mad enough to go to college and become a teacher. That's exactly what I did.
You've been motivated by anger a couple of times.
I became a school principal, teacher, school bus driver, and part-time janitor all at the same time.
I hope you brought it back to the attention of that teacher.
You bet I did.
No, good.
His name was, you don't quote this, his name was Mr. Heinley. And he was a German fighter pilot in his day, fought the Americans.
Hmm.
He was a pilot in those airplanes. And what a guy. But he was pretty snooty to me. But that whole sense of discovery, I think, is really important to people. We think the world's been explored completely, and I suppose people have walked just about everywhere now, but they haven't discovered anything, you know, to speak of. And it's all still there. It is to be found by every individual. And survival, living off the land, just accentuates your awareness of all of that. You have to know every twig and every boulder and rock and what it can be used for, and you see things differently. You never look at the grove of trees in the same way again. And that's what I hope that my students pick up, is that it's not just scenery anymore. it's a livelihood, and it's something that can really help you. That does it for me.
I'll talk just a little bit about the application of primitive skills, and you've already touched on that a little bit. Let's see if I can elaborate. Do you see the possibility in the future that people might have to use primitive skills for their survival? And if so, where in the world today is it possible to live a primitive lifestyle? Or is that in fact the purpose of learning primitive skills?
I associate with, a couple of times a year, a group of people whose sole purpose in life, it seems to be to become as proficient in the primitive technologies as they can get. And I've taken the opportunity to interview them. These are people who do it by choice, not because they were born to it. And in interviewing these people, the reasons for them doing it are pretty similar, but there seems to be several different branches of it. One of them is the idea that the world's going to pot, literally pot, and that nobody can think anymore, and that the day's going to come when all of our technology is going to fail us, and that they will have to go back to primitive skills. I personally have a problem with that because we know too much now already. And if we lost all of our technology, it wouldn't even be a year before the minds of people would gather together and recreate, essential technological things that even from the rubble of what's left could be created, a lot of things that would enrich our lives and not necessarily be Stone Age in doing it. So I think that's pretty impractical to think that way. The other branch is that the people do it because it gives them a sense of security, that just like Tom was talking about today, that just to know that without all of that packed in finery that you become dependent on, you can still exist. You're not dependent. You're a independent agent on the earth with the free will to use the technology of the day to benefit us as we will, but not being afraid of being without it. And there's a lot of people that feel that way. The third area that strikes me is that people really enjoy it. And they're just doing it for the fun of it. And it is fun. It's great. On the other hand, when I go to places like Peru and talk with people who are living pretty close to the Stone Age, you get a different set of answers. Those people are there in desperation, or they're there by birth, not choice, and they would welcome the opportunity to step out of it and have some technology in their lives. But that's only a few. Most of the people that I've ever met that were true primitive people were living that way because by choice, just the same as we do. It's exactly the same thing. It's a way of life. They understand it. It feels good, and they don't want to change it. I had one guy who works for a big bus company. He's a business executive, and we met him in a little town in Peru, and he invited us to walk up to this little farm that my son owns there now, and see the cornfields. And on the way back down, the rain just started pouring down, and it was very steep, mountainous country. And he says, well, let's stop by my mother's house. And it was just a doorway in the street, on these adobe walls. And we went in there, and here was this courtyard with little buildings built off of it. And there was the mother sitting under a shelter built in the middle of that courtyard, cooking her food on a fire on the ground in a clay pot. And it was just, even though she was in a town, you stepped in there and you're right in the Stone Age. Mm-hmm. And he introduced us, and we sat there for almost 2 hours. And I just soaked up that woman's life and realized that she had at her fingertips outside that door all the technology that Peru has to offer. And a son who has a college education, who could have taken her and put her up in a nice apartment, But she refused to live that style because she grew up that way and that was her choice to stay there. And I thought that was pretty cool. So.
Tom, you want to add anything to the future, whether or not we will have to rely on primitive skills in the future?
You know, I think Larry hit it, the reasons. I mean, yeah, survival, the principles of survival carry out in everyday life. I mean, you heard me say you learn in survival, you're sitting on a stump someplace, you're freezing to death, you're blaming the weather, you're blaming the time of year, you're blaming the instructor. You ain't gonna do anything about it. You've got to make the choice to make it a heaven or hell. And you realize in survival, if you're freezing, you got two choices: build a fire or build a shelter, or both. So when you bring this out into society, this survivalist attitude, you stop blaming, you know, society for your misfortune. You don't like it, change it. You know, there's a lot of little things in survival that teach you how to live in everyday life. Like right now, we're here sitting in semi-comfortable chairs. If we had to, we could sit on the ground. Yeah, it's a little less comfortable sitting on these rocks, but it ain't gonna bother us if that's all we have, you know what I mean? But we have the skills to make it better. Go up and get some debris and sit on the damn debris, you know, that kind of thing. Survival is it starts on a primitive level, but it's an ingenuity that carries through every facet of society. I mean, what's a leaf spring to one man is a hide scraper to another, you know? It's just the way of looking at things. And I think it carries, it's applicable right now, that whole attitude of, I can survive, I can make the best of things, I can make things better for myself, you know, it's my choice.
And you don't have to be downtrodden.
Right.
And dirt poor and destitute in order to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
One other comment I wanted to make was that, you know, the direct question is, are we going to have to survive with these skills in society at some point in time? I don't think we will, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to reach a point in society at some near time where people are destitute, the thing does collapse on us, and we've got tremendous problems. What I'm saying is that I think that we now have the enlightenment and ability that when that happens, we'll solve those problems with a lot more technology than the Stone Age had. That's, although we may really treasure, those of us that know the Stone Age skills will really treasure those and put them to use when it's appropriate. And that's a safe feeling.
Yeah.
Just to add to that a little bit, the state of Washington hired me to come to Seattle 1 year to be a part of a think tank. And the challenge for that year was to find ways to evacuate the people of Seattle if there was an atomic bomb threat on the base, shipping yards there, and the military base that's there. And they were trying to figure out how to get the people across those bridges, off the Sound, and up into over the mountains, into those valleys beyond the mountains where they would be safe from from fallout. And we had 3 days to sit and think and talk, and there were 4 or 5 other men there that were brought from around the country, various things. And I mostly listened. I didn't have a whole lot to say about it. And the thing that came out of that was that the people in Seattle had reached a state of helplessness to the point that there would be no point in rescuing them. And the conclusion was, and the official documentation on that is, this very day, seal the bridges and leave them there. Talk about...
They don't have a clue with what to do when they got up in the hills anyway.
Yeah, they wouldn't know what to do with them when they got in there. And so they just said, just tell everybody, stay in your homes.
Trust
That's
us.
the answer. Trust us.
It reminds me of the old joke, if you'll allow me to intervene here with the story of two boys got out on a hike, and one of them stops to go to the bathroom, and while he's got his pants down, he gets bitten on the butt by a snake.
Mm-hmm.
Says, what do I do, what do I do? He says, I don't know, I'll go ask the scoutmaster. He goes and runs to ask the scoutmaster, and the scoutmaster tells the other scout, says, well, what you gotta do is you gotta make a couple little incisions and suck the venom out.
Yeah.
So he goes running back to his friend, what does the scoutmaster say? He says, the scoutmaster says you're gonna die.
To Native Americans, pre-conquest or before the coming of white people, their lifestyle and their religious beliefs were seamless, each based on a deep respect for the earth. Today, the practice of primitive skills or primitive technology is sometimes divorced from a spiritual grounding, similar to what the native peoples had. What is the proper role today, in each of your views, of these two? Should they be tied or should they be divorced? Or is that a decision that each person needs to make?
I think it's a decision of each person. I mean, in a way, I believe the more time people spend out there, even those people who have no faith at all, don't even believe that there's a God. Put them out there for a couple of weeks. They'll suddenly realize there's a creator. You know, they have this whole spiritual.
Realize something's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe instead of finding out the hard way by putting yourself out there and realizing, you know, wow, there is something, that just get on with it and understand that it's part of everything and approach it that way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe you can separate one from the other, but that's my personal beliefs.
I feel the same way. I was brought up in a culture that is very sensitive and very spiritual. And I've always had that, felt it. Not that everybody lives it. And I think in Aboriginal times it was the same way. The Aboriginal ideal that we see the Indians as today were that they were close to the earth and they were very in tune with things and that they had this spiritual connection. And I think all of that is true in concept and precept. In practice, probably not as true. Because many of them were very vicious people, and you don't learn to be vicious out there. You know, that's not what you learn. You decide that yourself. And so, and the same with the white people that came out here. Some of them melted into the land, had their little farms, minded their business, tended things, made friends with the Indians, and were just fine. Whereas others came out wanting to destroy all the Indians so that they would be out of the way. They wouldn't have to worry about them, that kind of thing. And it's a matter of where you come from. But I do believe that it's very difficult for a person to be out there for very long without realizing that something is going on. That all of this explanation, that it's all phenomenon of nature and has evolved over the eons, there's just not a lot of hope in that. And it doesn't really make as much sense as they try to make it sound like. I think evolution is a process. I think it's really there, but it's not without guidance. And so, being spiritual in the wilderness and using these skills, I see the skills as being a tool that builds confidence. It's not that the skill itself is so important. They're really pretty simple, and they're really something that if anybody can figure out to do a better way, if they think about it long enough. But it's what it gives you inside, and that's spiritual, that ties me to the tools. And I guess it's an old Mormon concept that says that all things are spiritual. The earth itself has its own spirit, and the people that are on it were sent here as to work out something while we're here in this sphere, to have this experience for something really greater beyond, not just to float around on a cloud and play a harp or anything, but to really have an influence on eternity and eons of words. And so survival skills, living off the land, being close to Mother Earth, and feeling of that spirit is as much a part of my religion and my spiritual upbringing as anything I can think of. But I don't pretend to believe that everybody feels that way, even though they're brought up with it. In any society,
Right.
there are those who will exploit.
Uh,
Hey, quarters. They're nice people in the toilet, filling their pens and
Yeah.
I was
video
trying to
camera.
be invisible.
No, Larry's right though. I mean, to me, I look at the wilderness as God's temple, the Great Spirit's temple. I mean, we're always attached to the earth. The umbilical cord is always there. To me, it is also a gift, not only a place of worship, but a gift. And anytime we do bad things to the earth, it's like spitting on that gift, showing absolute disrespect. And it's not only the Native American culture and many people that think like Larry and I do about this spiritual and skill and survival connection, but it goes all around the earth. Any culture that is close to the earth gets that same reverence, I think. But again, people are individuals. They make their own choices. I just think a non-spiritual approach is a barely subsistence level in survival, because you're missing the bigger picture. You're missing.
Well, it's the Hollywood version. You look at the primitive caveman movies that have come out over the years, and they're just brutes. They have no spirituality to them, and that's the way the world sees it. And I don't think it was ever that way.
How large would you estimate the primitive skills movement, if we can call it that, is?
How large?
Yeah, and maybe we can arrive at some kind of a figure by telling how many students each of you has had go through your schools, or maybe you'd even hazard a guess at how many people are out there today who have gone through any school at all or studied this.
Imagine.
I remember around 25,000 tracker students. Like, just
20 years.
over 20 years.
If you throw the military in there, probably 30.
I don't think I would have that many.
But then you gotta see each person reaches how many other people.
Yeah, it'd be hard to come up with a number.
Atomic reaction.
On the rehab trips that we've taken, I personally have had out over 10,000. With Anasazi and the work that we're doing now, that I don't get directly involved in, there's been another 3,000 or so. So, on that end of it, there's that many people. And I'll guarantee you that 95% of those are in tune with what was taught to them now. I mean, they had a life-changing experience. Of the people that I've taken out on treks because they wanted to learn the skills and they wanted to have the experience, maybe another 10,000 total. So, but that wouldn't be counting all of the branches of it that are now in operation, and they're all doing thousands. And I don't know, this would be impossible to come up with a number.
Well, these two people are responsible for training 50,000 people, conservatively, I'd say. And I think it would be lunch table today. And I looked at these two and I just thought, God, here are the two grandfathers, of this movement. Here are the
No,
two
he's
people.
older.
Not much.
Here are the two people who have so much knowledge and experience, It was really an amazing.
Yeah, we're gonna go off to our caves. Well, wouldn't that be nice?
You know, Tom, I decided that I really wanted to find the truth one time. And I was bound determined that I was going to learn the truth. So I went to a high mountain there in Idaho and found a cave. And I sat in that cave for weeks. And I finally learned the truth.
What's that?
There ain't no bathrooms in Cape. That's a joke.
Well, what Kevin said a minute ago is certainly true. The two of you are generally recognized as the fathers of primitive skills.
I think Larry more than me. I was still kicking around the woods when Larry's book was out.
Doesn't mean you weren't learning.
Yeah, well. I did the other, I didn't go to college right when I left grandfather. I went and wandered for a decade, but better than college. But it's, yeah, I was learning, but still, you started the whole thing of bringing it on.
Probably as far as a movement is concerned, that's true. But I personally don't like the idea of being, for two reasons, of being the grandfather of a movement. Number one, I don't have any say about where it goes.
Yeah. That's potential.
And I am reluctant to have other people look at me in a way that would cause them to feel like I have some power over them, or the worship thing, you know. It's nice, it feels good to be in a position where people look up to you, but it doesn't feel good to be in a position where all of a sudden they think that you're the answer to their life somehow.
Yeah, start setting expectations for how you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm who I am, and that will never be what a lot of people think they see. And so I don't want the job.
Wait, funny to listen to you.
Joe, you want a job?
No thanks.
Well, let me rephrase that question so we get to the second half of it.
Okay.
Yeah, we taught a lot of people.
You taught a lot of people. Are you encouraged by the interest that you spawned over the past few decades?
In a nutshell, yeah.
Yeah. That feels good. And I think it feels so good that I'm hoping it'll get me where I hope I go.
It's good enough.
That's good enough, yeah.
Balance.
I hope I make it. I've had a lot of really heartfelt good feelings from people when you realize that you really have touched their life. I don't think there's anything that can compare to that. Yeah. And I've had that experience, I've had that blessing, and just many, many times, over and over. And that feels good. It's almost not like having a job or a profession. It's like being something with someone. You know, it's not work. I think that's what's kept me young all these years. What was your question again?
Are you encouraged by the interest that you spawned
yeah.
over the past few decades? Tom, anything to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I see, you know, people that use the primitive skills, whether it's the survival, tracking, whatever the primitive skill, gets them closer to the earth. That kind of an environmentalist is real. It's a real child of the earth. It isn't someone who jumped on the big green bandwagon and is going to ride out the latest fad. This is part of their lives now. And that's what does my heart good, is that this has just been a vehicle to get them there. I've been like a signpost or a stepping stone along their sacred path, whatever it might be in life. And their environmental motives are a lot stronger, a lot deeper. They know themselves a lot better, too.
Well, let me pop that balloon with the next question then. If each of you have reached 50,000 people, that is, together have reached 50,000, and through your teachers, many, many more, still, I'm sure you'll have to admit that's a drop in the bucket of humankind. And today, there are people, just go into a city and you'll see them, who are so unfamiliar with wilderness and are afraid of the dangers, real or imagined, of wild places. And they never come in contact with the natural world. Is there any hope in trying to reach these people?
There's always got to be hope, and there's always an interest. I don't care how deeply it might be buried in somebody. You could pull out a bow drill in the middle of 5th Avenue and 42nd Street, and you'll attract attention. There's something in a primitive skill that's magic, and you gotta have hope. Without hope, you don't have the fuel for your vision. I think people are eager to get back in touch with something that's real after being surrounded, especially a deep city dweller, where everything is plastic and cement and games and smoke and God knows what. There's almost a hunger for reality, a hunger to get back to the earth. Look how abused Central Park is on a nice sunny day. People just swarming to it like it's some kind of a medication. Yeah, it dwells, I think, in everybody now. And Johnny Muir even said, in his writing about how people hunger for it. Go ahead, Larry. Bail me out. Or disagree with me.
We're not getting much of that today.
Not much to disagree on. I just think what he said is it. People that you say in an inner city where they have no contact with it, how are we going to, what's the hope of getting these people in tune with it? I think in reality there's not going to be a whole lot of that happen. But everybody that I've ever met has had some thoughts on it. If you ask them what they think about it, they don't have to pause and say, well, I'm not familiar with that. They've already thought about it. And everyone wants to be, quote, self-sufficient, at least to the point of being able to take care of themselves if they needed to. Everyone desires that, and I think everyone thinks about it. But they have nothing to base it on. And that's the problem. Without the reality of the experience, I don't see that a lot of them are going to actually get it. Although it's still a desire, as Tom says, that they have. Everybody wants it. So I don't know.
All our role now is to get them out. In other words, entice them in.
Yeah.
Show them there is a way. That's why I know Larry feels the same way. You're tired from a trip and all of a sudden you hear, oh my God, I got to go home and give this lecture.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be a day off or 2 days off or whatever. But you got to do it because you may reach even 5 people in an audience of 200 that you'll motivate them, and then those 5, and then they'll come out and get into the wilderness, if not through me or Larry, then through somebody else, and then they will go out and motivate more. It's that kind of consciousness that's got to run through the global society.
While you're on that, I think there's an even bigger group of people in the world who are not what we would think of as the New Yorker. They're genuinely third world poor survivalists. But they're living in societies that are so narrow in their traditions, being a lot of it, and culture having such a grip or such a influence in their lives that they really don't know how to take care of themselves except in that narrow way. And when disasters come, they seem to be the most helpless people.
Oh yeah.
And I think when these things do come down, it's not going to be modern society that suffers as much as all this third world poor situation. And you look at the famine we had over here in Africa here a while back, that was just so pathetic.
They always wear the bread. It's so sad. These mudslides in Peru or something.
And I have had such a little taste of it that I really want to explore it more. Of going into a group of people who are really third world and showing them some of the primitive skills that actually improve their life, and they got excited about it. really exciting. It wasn't something that white man was fostering on them that's made out of plastic. It was something real that they could go out and get in their backyard,
Right.
see?
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that they had to save a lifetime to get enough pennies together to go buy somewhere, you know. And I think they look for that. And we have at BYU, there's a thing called the Benson Institute.
Yeah, I was thinking that when
And their whole focus in life is to provide those kinds of things to the world. And they go into these third world countries, sit down, teach those people how to raise better tomatoes and better gardens, and they do it without shipping in a lot of goods to them, see. Find ways to make compost on their own place and do it. Ways to identify the native plants that are around them that they can cultivate and put to use instead of selling them seed corn from the United States, you know.
That's one of
That
the
kind of stuff.
dangers. It's
Yeah.
so firmly on the head with survival. You get too narrow in survival.
Yeah.
Any variation, you're in trouble. That's why you and I
tradition
both
dictates
teach.
that,
Yeah.
yeah.
We teach a broad spectrum of survival, not just one fire-making device or one shelter or one trap, but several alternatives. So that if, okay, so this happened, we got this to go with, and that happens, we got this to go with. We have a broader understanding of the whole picture of survival. And that's why third worlders will tend to have these disasters.
The Chinese, an example of that. I had a man, a friend of mine, who I suppose he's dead now, I don't know for sure. But he was the head of the Oak Ridge Laboratories in Tennessee, experimental survival for world problems. He was in China during the revolution. He was there as a kind of a anthropologist helper to a village of people. And he got caught in the uprooting when the communists came in and says, okay, all of you on the road, out of your homes, get on the road and start walking. See? And they walked them, a couple 100 miles to kill off everybody that wasn't fit. And then those that were left, they took them out into the wilderness and plopped them down and says, build a town. And that's how they dispersed the people and got control. He walked that. He walked nearly 1,000 miles across China. Nearly died, starvation himself. And came back and was just the most interesting guy. But part of what he taught was that when aid finally came to those people that got outside of the communist influence, the aid that came from the United States was in the form of wheat. They wouldn't use it. It wasn't rice. They wouldn't use it. They threw it away.
Chicken sure as hell loved it.
Yeah. So it's just
To me, choice before, like things you learn in survival, you bring out in everyday life. But intelligent choices, not following the gang or doing, blaming their predicament on their alcoholic father and their drug-addicted mother and their street gangs, but make a choice to do something different, to be happy in life, not, I don't know, follow the crowd. That self-sufficiency, that independence, that power inside the person so changes them. The intimacy with something greater in life, a greater mystery, changes them. There's not just one thing. It's getting them back to the purity, the simplicity that starts the seed, plants that seed. But Larry would know better than I how the mechanism works. I mean, because you've got kids that are they're all beaten up.
Maybe I could best answer that by not answering it. I'll tell the story instead. Probably in the top 5 reasons for living that most teenagers have is the concept that they have to have their friends. Every teenager has to have their friends. And those friends become far more important than the family, they become more important than their school. They become more important than living under the law. They, you know, those friends are it, and they'll do anything those friends want to do. Well, when they get to us, they are suddenly without those friends. They're in a wilderness situation where their livelihood is dependent upon their ability to learn the skills, and their comfort is dependent upon their ability to really perfect those skills and improve on them. And that becomes the focus of life, and there's no time for the casual friendships or the silly kind of friendships that they seem to be so dependent on before. And the friendships that do develop out there are built around saving each other's lives, meaningful kinds of things, and long periods of silence, which kids and teenagers do not have today. They get up in the morning, on goes the radio, earphones or whatever, and then they get to school and it's yak, yak, yak for 6 hours or 5.5 hours. Lunchtime is a big clanking noise, and then on go the earphones at home, and then TV at night, and then they're in bed. They haven't had any silence themselves. So what happens then on the trail, I see when the kids are home, and I can call them up 6 months later and interview them, or a year later and interview them. And one of the questions that I always ask is, well, have you changed your friends, or what friends do you hang around with now? And it surprises me how many of them say, well, I don't particularly have any certain friends anymore. I just kind of hang around with everybody. They're no longer dependent on those friends. And they're independent people then. And they can make the choices based on who they are and not what the crowd wants them to do. And so I don't know if that helps answer that question or not. That's what I see.
Let me finish the interview with one last question, a very open-ended question, so hopefully give you the latitude to answer however you want. If you had the ear of the world today, if you were giving the State of the World address or something and everybody was tuned in, what would you want to say?
Oh boy.
I guess I'm just asking you, is there any final thing you want to say that I haven't covered?
Simply, we've got to stop being a society of people who kill our grandchildren and feed our children. We've got to have people realize we're at war. It isn't just in a neighborhood. It isn't just in one city. It isn't just in the United States. It's across the world. The earth is a living entity, spiritually, a gift. Might be on borrowed time. Time to go to war. Time to stop fighting with each other and go to war.
Good analogy. To the world, huh? I don't know if any of you ever heard of Dr. Hugh Nibley. He's a great environmentalist, but he's more than that. He's one of the great thinkers of the world. He went to Berkeley, and as a young boy, he went to the furthest corner of the library at Berkeley and pulled off the first book, and he never left the university until he was at the other end, going off the last book. That kind of a mind. And he could read this book in 15 minutes. But he knows 42 languages. He's an Egyptologist. He can read the hieroglyphics in Egypt just like he can read a book. And just one of the really great minds. He happens to reside at BYU. They've got him locked away in some basement somewhere, and all he does is write. And I'll never forget, one time I came in all grubby and dirty, and I'd never met the guy. I came in grubby and dirty, and I stripped off there at the college in the PE department and went into the showers. And I was standing in the shower, and here comes this ancient old man walking in there. And got into the shower, he stood for the shower. This is a circular thing with heads coming off of it. And he stood on the other side of the post and was showering, and we got to talking. And he introduced himself as Hugh Nibley, and I went, oh, really? You know, heard all about him. And so we got to talking, and I kind of asked him that same question. I said, of all the studying and all of the brilliance that you have and the volumes, I mean, the guy's written a whole library of books. I said, what is the cut of it all? What would you have to say if it was your last words? And he said, well, after everything else we can do, he says there's really only two things that we can do. And he says we can repent and we can forgive. And that was all he'd say. And I've tried to live by that and figured out all these years. But when you really get down to it, we have to repent of how we treat people and the earth. And we have to forgive anybody that's involved in it from any level. Because until we do that, we can't reach their hearts. And I really believe that people are not all that bad. And that if we can be pure ourselves, we can touch their heart, and then the earth will change. I think that's what he was trying to tell me. So.
Thank you both very much. Wonderful, wonderful answer to give. I hope I can do it justice.
Yeah, no problem. I don't believe in coincidences. So you gonna be here for next week's class, or?
No, we're going to head back to Montana.
Oh, okay. I didn't know where you were hanging out, or?
My son lives up in Petaluma, so we're going to go see him tomorrow and spend a couple of days with him, and then head back to Montana. I got to go back to work by Monday.
Work! I got to study.
That's it.
10 acres.